Hello, hello. It is Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. Thanks for joining me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. And today, I'm going to go over some of the best mixing advice of the year 2025. We have just finished our MixCon series of masterclasses. We brought you about a half a dozen masterclasses, more than that in workshops, getting mixing advice from some of the best mixing engineers, producers working today, people who've worked on platinum selling projects, Grammy winning projects, just a whole slew of great people. The speakers today I thought were amazing. And I'm going to give you just a quick podcast episode today that's going to be about recapping the things that hit me the most. You got to remember, I have seen so many masterclasses. I've been producing a half a dozen masterclasses for MixCon every year for 11 years now. So I've seen all of those, and I've seen all the stuff that wound up on the cutting room floor. I've interviewed all of these major mixers, and I also watch other people's videos and masterclasses, and we've done a whole bunch of other stuff. And I talk to and interview so many producers and engineers, but I got to tell you, every time I do something like this, there's always some new nugget of wisdom that is new even to me, or that I notice resonates incredibly well with the general viewers out there who are really into this kind of content, or that I know is stuff that my clients need to hear, whether they are my mastering clients or my mix coaching clients. And I want to get right into some of those key takeaways with you today. Last quick note I want to give you before we jump right into that is that we are giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear in the MixCon mega giveaway. You can check that out over at mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com. Click at the giveaway button up at the top, and we really are giving away more than $10,000 worth of stuff totally for free. 3 chances to win. Whole bunch of plugins from all the MixCon sponsors, from Waves, from Steinberg, from Sound Toys. We're giving away headphones from Odyssey. We're giving away speakers from Cali Audio and from Adam, and we're giving away subs. We're giving away Sound ID Reference and Vocal AI from SonarWorks. So a lot of cool stuff I want to get into. And we're going to be going into the things that were my key takeaways from presentations from guys like this. Preston, Prisy Reid, R&B producer. We'll be talking about my key takeaways from him. Andrew Scheps, I think he's one of the best mixers working today. His work with on the Hosier records are gorgeous if you haven't heard that stuff. We're looking at the mixing masterclass with Nico Bolas. This guy has been at it for, oh my goodness. I mean, he's probably been at it professionally for like 40 or 50 years by now. He's done a ton of work with Neil Young and so many others, particularly in Americana and pop and rock and blues. Brent Kolatalo. Oh man, Brent is doing, I think, some of the best mixes for kind of indie and alt artists, but he also has a ton of experience in background around kind of hip hop and I think forward-looking stuff. And then Dana Nielsen, we're going to be looking at his. Before I get into it, just the briefest shout outs to our sponsors. Big shout out and thanks to Sound Toys always. They are giving away a whole bunch of stuff in the MixCon mega giveaway. You can also try out anything they make for free for 30 days over at soundtoys.com. And right now they're giving 60% off upgrades as part of their Black Friday sale. Also, big shout out and thanks. Sponsoring this week's episode is Pro Tools. If you go over to avid.com/pro-tools/SonicScoop, they're giving up to 40% off Pro Tools subscriptions. Pro Tools is the DAW I use, and I think it was a DAW used by all of the MixCon presenters this year. Also, shout out and thanks to Jay-Z. Right now, Black Friday deals for those guys too. 50% off their mics, plus an additional 10% off if you enter the code Justin at checkout. That's me, Justin. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Justin. I'm the SonicScoop guy. I'm a platinum mastering engineer. Now you're going to hear my take on some of the coolest pieces of wisdom from today's or this year's MixCon presenters. All right, I'm going to start off with Andrew Scheps, and I want to give you not only some of the technical ideas and insights that you can use in your work right now, but also the mindset and personality things we can learn from and take away from each of these guys. And for Andrew, I think one of the biggest things I take away from Andrew is to not be too precious, particularly about the technical stuff. And if you're going to be precious about anything in the mix, you should be precious about the things that affect emotional resonance. That the things that he's precious about, that he's constantly tweaking, making small changes, aren't motivated by what should I be doing? What's the right thing to be doing? What's the technically correct thing I'm supposed to be doing? He is precious really only about how is this impacting me emotionally? How does it make me feel? And that's the lens through which he sees everything. And so many of us come into music with that lens on at first, the artistic lens. That's what made us love music. But then we lose that lens and we put on the engineering lens. And putting on the engineering lens is important, and it'll help you learn technical stuff, and it'll help you make fewer mistakes, and it'll help you figure out what to do when problems arise. But it won't help you make really masterful mixes and really beautiful production choices. What will help with that is taking off the engineer lens and putting back on the lens of, how does this make me feel? The choices I made, what did they change in the way I feel things in my body and the way I feel things emotionally? Thinking less about impressing other audio engineers and thinking more about having a resonant emotional impact, even if it's feelings about textures. And I got to tell you, that approach is what makes Andrew Scheps make mixes that other mixers love. That he's really exploring what in the textures he's producing, how do they actually make him feel, not just how do they sound. So that's a big part of just the personality thing. But the things that were key takeaways for me from the technical side and from the mixing side was just him talking about Atmos mixing, which is something I haven't been super interested in, because my thought with Atmos is so few of us are going to be in surround sound systems where we get to hear all these speakers. But Andrew's framing of Atmos is totally different. When he is mixing in Atmos, his primary vehicle for the Atmos mixes are headphones. For him, Atmos mixing, first and foremost, is about making mixes that sound even more interesting and even better in headphones. And that should translate to stereo speakers, but that also work and are interesting in Atmos as well. So it's not about mixing for this whole big Atmos system, the surround system, and then hoping that some of those choices make sense in headphones. No, it's completely the other way around. He first says, what can I do in Atmos to make sure that it sounds good to stereo end listeners who are listening on AirPods and their iTunes is by default maybe set to Atmos? How can he make it sound even more interesting and intriguing to those people? And then once the mix works on the headphones, only then really talking about folding it up to the full speaker system and working now on that experience. And I've got to say, this makes so much more sense to me, because one of my big complaints about this idea of surround sound mixing has been, man, if people are going to specialize in mixing around surround and then trying to be honest, if you've ever been on a surround system, it is so much easier to mix for surround than for stereo, because you barely have to EQ anything. To keep things from stepping on each other, you can just move this one over here, move that one over there, and you don't have to do all of the work that stereo or mono force you to do. When you're forced to make the entire mix work across literally just two speakers, that's hard. You have to do carving to make sure that each of these components fit well together. And by starting the Atmos mix and making sure it translates to headphones first, you're still encouraged to do that work. And then you take that and fold up to the full surround system, instead of going the other way around, where you just put things in places where they fit, barely have to tweak them. And now, man, you'd have to do all this additional work to make it work in stereo. And he likens it to the process of starting your mix on small speakers like the Oratones over my shoulders and then folding up to your big speakers, instead of working the other way around, which can be depressing. All right, so those are some of my key takeaways there. I really like so many things he talked about in this presentation, especially on the production end, of really committing to sounds on the way in and then layering commitments you've made on top of other commitments. If you're really producing, making interesting sounds on the way in and layering interesting sounds on top of interesting sounds, instead of just haphazardly recording a performance and hoping you make it sound good later. So he really has a big focus on that. And he also had a focus, again, on making sure you take things that are emotionally compelling and the technical stuff comes later. For instance, he took less than perfectly recorded piano and vocal performances, one mic that was capturing piano and vocal, ran that stuff through a stem separator tool, had these, somewhat imperfect now separated piano and vocals, and said, that's what we have. These are beautiful performances. We're going to run with that and then build everything around that aesthetic of the nucleus of this one performance in front of one mic, even if it's not the perfect recording with the perfect balance between piano and mic. And even though it's hamstringing us and theoretically stopping us from being able to process vocal and process piano separately. You know what? Let's use technology. Put it through a stem separator, separate the one from the other, and it doesn't really matter if there is the potential for, I don't want to say artifacting, because when you put them back together, there really shouldn't be significant artifacts, but just not being allergic to your audio and really caring much more about the emotion that's coming across than nail biting about whether you're technically doing things right. And he's clearly able to get beautiful results doing so. So for those of you who complain that sometimes the MixCon masterclasses, hey, all the material sounded great when they got it. In a way, that's what's happening with Sheps, because they're making decisions about how things should sound on the way in. But in a way, it's not what's happening, because he'll take less than perfect sources, and rather than complain about them and complain about turd polishing, he will say, there's a spirit in this thing. We picked it because it's emotionally beautiful. Let's respect what's in there and let's use it. And you can do the same. And that approach leads to texturally interesting mixes that don't sound like everything else. All right. The next guy I want to move on to here, who I thought had some insights that were just absolutely beautiful from the perspective of focusing on things that matter, is Nico Bolas. And Nico's presentation has gotten so many positive comments on it. You should see some of the comments. Comments like people wrote in, I didn't expect to start tearing up when I turned on a MixCon masterclass today. This one is so emotionally resonant. There's so many people who were in there in the comments saying, I was going to skip this one, but I'm sure glad I didn't. So if you haven't checked this one out, check it out, because this is almost the anti-masterclass. I kid you not, at some point in his masterclass, Nico opens up the DAW and he starts like opening up an EQ and showing what he was doing with an EQ, and he just stops and closes it and says, I can't do this. I'm not going to sit here and play you what this sounded like before and then I put an EQ on and it sounds brighter. It's like, if you want something to sound brighter, you know how to make it sound brighter. Go and do that. Like, trust your judgment. And his masterclass almost turned into a pep talk about reminding you that you have tastes that are unique and special to you. And instead of impersonating someone else or figuring out how someone else would do something, like, you just experiment a lot and trust your judgment, trust your tastes, do it many times, and you don't need to see someone else moving faders and someone else moving EQs. You don't need to see someone else moving EQs and saw that they made something brighter to know that when you need to make something brighter, you can and will make it brighter. And I'm not doing it justice, but if you actually listen to him, I think it's one of those presentations where it will change you down to your bones when you listen to this guy's spirit about it. I thought also one of the great things about Nico is that he had a totally different perspective from every other person who's at MixCon this year and most recent years, because the trend in mixing today has been to take the rough mix that you get from an artist and then open up that DAW session that they had with all their plugins on it and then start tweaking from there. And that is what almost, I think, everyone this year did in their presentations, except for Nico. And it's what almost everyone did last year. And Nico comes from the old school where he says, if you're hiring me to mix something, it's because you want my interpretation of the mix. So I'm going to do that. He said, if you really love the sound of the mix that you have and you want that, but just a little bit different, don't send it to me. Have the person who is mixing it finish mixing it, or have them go to a mastering engineer and have them put on the final touches. If you already love what you have and you want that, but 5 or 10% better, don't send it to me. That's not what I'm here for. There's so many people who'd be happy to do that, but I'm not one of them. I figure if you want me to mix something, it's because you didn't love the mix that you have and you want someone else's interpretation of what it should sound like. And man, for him to have the guts to approach it that way in today's day and age, I think is absolutely beautiful. And his approach to mixing is just like it would have been in 1977, even though he's doing it now in 2025. His approach to mixing now is the same as it would have been in 1975 or 1985 or 1995, which is all the faders start down, and then you pull up what you think is the most important element. For him, it's probably first the vocal, and then the backbeat, the percussive elements, getting those working together, and then the foundation of the record, whether that's bass or whether it's strings or whether it's a main keyboard, like figuring out what are those three main elements in the mix that really make it groove, and then bringing everything else in around them. And his idea that if you give the same mix to 5 different mixers, you should get 5 different sounding mixes, because each of them is going to have a slightly different interpretive lens of what is really the most important element from section to section, what should be enhanced. And he is really about getting physical and getting in there and moving faders. But I thought that was beautiful, bucking the trend of the way people do things today. And I will say that Nico's mixes are different than some of the other mixes we've listened to. They're a little bit more freewheeling, and they make more sense in the styles that he works in. A lot more stuff that I might describe as Americana and roots rock, and these styles that are about living, breathing performances. And to him, the mix is also a living, breathing performance. So really cool. And if you want a whole different mind shift on how one can approach mixing, I totally recommend checking out the full MixCon masterclass from Nico Bolas. He's worked with Neil Young, Prince, Sheryl Crow, Fiona Apple. He worked early in his career with Linda Ronstadt. Like, he goes way back. And he's just a really fun and funny guy. This is one of the other standout things for me from MixCon, is just how much the soft skills of these people matter and are important. Like with Nico, every time I got on the phone with Nico, he talked to me like I've known him for 20 years. Like, he just talked to me like I was an old friend of his. And to a degree, Andrew Scheps is the same way. And to a degree, almost all of the people who I talk to who are successful at MixCon have this manner about them, where they talk to you like you already know, like, and trust each other, and like they're already comfortable with you, and they just assume that you're comfortable with them and they're comfortable with you. And that is so crucial, so big. And Nico, like, exemplified that, I think, more than anyone I've talked to this year. Like, you talk to him, he's just instantly likable, because he's extremely self-effacing, but not in a, what's the word the kids are using today? Not in a simpy way, not in a, I don't know what to say, how to say it, not in an insecure way. He's self-effacing, the type of self-effacing that comes from the confidence of having messed up millions of times in your life, but knowing that it's all going to turn out okay in the end, and that you've made more good decisions than bad ones, even though you can remember all of the bad ones, and being comfortable with that. So I think that was something that shined through for Nico. He's just insanely likable, and you should check out the masterclass. It's fun. It's only 30 minutes long. Next one that I want to talk about, which I thought was huge, and this one is a really cool one. The one that Brent Kolatalo did. Brent Kolatalo, I think he's an absolutely brilliant mixer. He's worked with Taylor Swift, Lana Del Rey, Kanye West, a whole bunch of big names. Sound Toys sponsored this one. And some of my key takeaways from him, this is the biggest thing that I got from him, is that he does 2 versions of every mix. And this one actually had a huge impact on me, and just subconsciously, it changed the way I approach my mastering with my mastering clients since I produced this masterclass. I have absolutely stolen this idea from Brent Kolatalo. Brent says that he does 2 different versions of the mix, and this is kind of like a happy medium between Nico Bolas's approach of, I'm going to give you my personal interpretation of the mix, not try to give you the mix you had but 5% better, and the approach of someone else. Like, we'll get to Prisy a little later on, where he really takes the original mix, really respects it, and just tries to refine things around the edges, which is also beautiful and also totally valid. But those are opposite ends of the spectrum. We'll talk about Nico, who's just, totally dramatic, not necessarily dramatically changing things, but just reinterpreting the mix, starting from zero, and Prisy, who's taking your mix and then adding what he does to it. In between that is Brent, who basically does both. He says, I'm going to give them 2 versions of their mix. I'm basically going to give them their demo on steroids. So their rough mix, but way better, will be one of the 2 mixes I give them. And then the other mix that I give them is going to be basically me reimagining their mix and doing some extreme things and allowing myself to just trust my judgment and say, hey, if this needs to change wildly, I'm going to change it wildly. I'm going to go in there and almost co-produce the thing to the degree where I'm going to mute down instruments that you don't need in different sections. He even went into the mix and added in kind of riser sounds, like whooshing sounds and like explosion sounds, very subtly, like right when a chorus hits in. like he would add these additional samples, and he would do, fairly radical things. He would do things that you'd expect a producer to do. I mean, some of the things are fairly subtle, mixery things, like he took the bass in his track and then added additional octaves to the bass. He took the vocals and did this almost like formant shifting where he made a demented version of the vocal and just very subtly layered it underneath. It's one of the things I love about Brent's approach is that to get his creative side going, he would do really extreme things and then put them way down in the mix. So he would do like extreme parallel processing where he would kind of warp things to his heart's content and then just use a little bit of that underneath the mix. And I think that's a beautiful way to go. But even from there, he went in two different directions. Here's your mix, but just slightly improved, a little bit bigger, wider, more impactful, adjusting the level balances a little bit where they should be, where the vocal should have popped out here more and the guitar should have popped out there more. And he also would do this reimagining mix. And depending on the client, sometimes they'd pick the more reimagined mix. Sometimes they'd pick the mix that was like their rough but better. And sometimes they'd say, ooh, I love things about both of them. Can we take the bridge from your totally messed up reimagined mix and the rest of the song from, the one that sticks very close to the original? Or, hey, can we kind of split the difference a little bit? I love what you did to the drums in your reimagined mix, but if we could just not go all of the way there, what could we do to go in that direction? You showed us how far it can go, but what if we were to just take some of those ideas? And I've started to do that more with my mastering clients, where it used to be so easy when I would have mastering clients come into the studio with me. I'd have them sit down on the couch behind me when I was in New York City, and I would have the big system going. I'd say, let's listen to some of your favorite records. You find out what this room sounds like, what great music you love sounds like in your room. And now we're going to play your record. Okay, we've got a little ways to go. We've got to bring up the level, obviously. Maybe we need to bring in more low end, or maybe we need to, tighten up the bass. Maybe we need to add a little bit of clarity or deboxify the mid-range or make it sound fuller and warmer. And let's hear going in that direction. Okay, we're going in this direction where things are darker and warmer and fuller. And that's a direction we could go. But we could also go in this direction where it's a little bit brighter and clearer. And which one do you like better? This production aesthetic or this production aesthetic? Ah, you're liking this warmer vibe. Okay, let's go down that road. And I really loved having clients in the studio. But even when I was in New York City, something like only 10% of my clients would actually come to the studio, and 90% of them would be sending me tracks from, halfway across the world. They'd be sending from Portugal and Texas and California and Singapore. And now that I'm in New Hampshire, basically all of my clients are remote. And I've tried to do that kind of process. Sometimes it's very easy to just send people one version and say, hey, this is it. Hope you like it. But often I've wanted to recreate that participatory feel where it's like, here's what I like, and here's some alternate versions of different directions it could go. But ever since hearing Brent, I'm like, you know what? No, I'm just going to be a little bit more bold and say, I am going to send you the version that, like, if it was up to me, this is what your record would sound like. Like, I still want to know what your references are, like what kind of records you like the sound of. And I'm just going to go as far as I want to go with. I'm going to push it hard, if need be, in the direction of how I think it should wind up. And I'm also going to do one that's like basically your mix, but only slightly enhanced. And I'll send you both of those. And you tell me which you like. And I'll tell you which one I like. And it's the one that, here's the one that I like. Now, with that said, I do have clients who are great mixers where I only send them one version because, like, how I would have it sound is basically the same as they already sent it to me. So there are still many, many cases where I just send them one version. And it's probably a slight majority of cases where it's just, here's one version. It sounds a lot like what you sent me because what you sent me is great. But because I do like coaching and I do education, I also get mixes from people who are towards the beginnings of their career rather than people who've been at it forever. And they might need more help. They might need to hear the direction their mix should really go. Like, they should have compressed things more. They should have EQ'd things more. They should have been less afraid of dynamic range controls. Maybe they pushed the drums way too hot when the guitar should be pushed. And I'm going to go in there with a stem adjustment tool and literally turn down their drums a little bit. And because I get clients who are more close to the beginning of their journey as well, just from the approach of being an educator, and I get a lot of those people who trust me as well, I'm not afraid to do that and just send them, here's my reimagining master, where it's like probably more heavy-handed than I would do for my more experienced clients, but this is where I think it should wind up, and you should mix it so it sounds like this when you're mixing. And then here's your mix, but better. And those kinds of clients almost invariably choose my more processed one. With some exceptions where they say, I really like your more processed one, but maybe it's a little bit too hot or a little bit too thick or a little bit too bright, or I hear the limiting a little bit too much. Can we back off a little bit? And then we do that. It also is helpful because if I get one of those clients whose stuff that I really, really love, just having the playground of being able to do a version where I push things hard and just hear what it sounds like if I'm making 2 dB EQ changes instead of half dB EQ changes. These are the things we're talking about in mastering, and mixing. You should often do much more than that. Just having that little playground exercise for me where I do a more reimagining one allows me to get that out of my system and then feel comfortable doing one that basically sounds just like their mix. I had my fun, I played around with it, and I've come to the determination that what you should have is basically your mix, only slightly louder and slightly EQ'd to fit in better in the world of fully released music out there. So that was a big takeaway for me, the idea of doing 2 mix versions for the client. One that is your sandbox and one that is the way that it basically already was, only a little better. I was ranting on that one because it seems so simple, it seems so obvious, and I think it's a meeting of 2 worlds that I really like. Okay, let's go a little bit faster here because we're going a little bit longer than I intended to here at 26 minutes, but you know how it is. When I get really into an idea, I can just attack it from all angles and make sure that it really sticks, because repetition is how we learn and how we change and feel things in our bones. Because if you want to have music production advice that's actually going to change the way you work, it's going to involve repetition of really important ideas. Because that is what changes behavior. It is not one tip you see once and then forget about. All right, onwards. Next couple, Prisy. Prisy was the opposite end of the spectrum from Nico, where at least on the mix that he was looking at this time, he did relatively little to it. And I loved his approach of really keeping it simple, not overcomplicating things, doing obvious things that work. Like, yeah, I'm going to put like a basic slapback delay on this vocal. It doesn't need to be fancy. We can do the basic things you're supposed to use. And he is using tools. He used a bunch of Waves plugins, who are the sponsors on his presentation, but they're plugins that he's been using for 20 years or more. Like, yes, we're going to put RVox on the vocal. Many, many people have put RVox on the vocal before. It kind of works, and we're going to just do that. So I really loved his vibe of just keeping things simple and knowing that he's kind of like a team player, and the mix isn't necessarily about him. So this is the opposite thing from the Nico approach. Like, I'm not here to reinterpret your mix. I'm assuming that you sent me something you really like already, and I'm here to refine it. I'm here to smooth things out, and I'm here to make better those few things that a lot of people could have done a better job of in their original mix. One of the first things he talks about with the vocal is like just adding a de-esser to it that wasn't there. And it's like, people, you got to be de-essing your vocal. If you like people to have ears that don't hate you, please use de-essers. And you know what? I'm putting it on. And that's like one of his most significant additions is like, I'm just smoothing things out and I'm just making sure that the rough edges aren't there quite as much. But then one of the more radical things that he did that I really liked, because I'm always telling people about this, is what he did with his mix bus. And I want to show you just how aggressive, sorry, not his mix bus, his effects bus. First of all, I love that he had an all effects bus. Generally in my mix coaching course, Mixing Breakthroughs, which you go check it out at mixingbreakthroughs.com. And you can get that course. It is a money back guarantee, no risk, 30 days. So if you don't like it, you just get your money back. But one of the big things there is this idea of mixing through subgroups, which Prisy does and pretty much all of the major mixers here. And we talk about creating your own template and how to go about that and how to think about gain staging in the mix and how to think about the most important things in the mix. And one thing that I didn't recommend in that course that I want to start recommending ever since I saw Prizzie doing it is, this idea of having an all effects bus that he can automate and that he can apply additional effects to. So he has multiple reverbs in this session. He had one super crazy long reverb that had an insanely long pre-delay and an insanely long reverb tail on it. And then he had some shorter reverbs, and he was mixing or matching, 3 or 4 different reverbs and a bunch of different delays across the session. But they all went to an all vocal effects bus. And then this all vocal effects bus got additional processing, and it was a way for him to more easily automate the relative levels between just effects in general and vocal, and to be able to have separate faders for all of the effects on the vocal and dry vocal. So that's something I haven't been putting into the templates and mixing breakthroughs. I'm like, why haven't I been putting the templates? More people should do that. And there's a bunch of major people who do, but the fact that he highlighted it, I thought was extremely useful. Not everyone does this, and I think more people should. But one of the things I loved about it is on this track, he's like, I'm doing something that I don't do on every single session, but was essential on this one. He's like, I'm EQing all of the vocal reverb returns, all of the vocal effects. I am putting this EQ on them. And this EQ, he is taking away all of the high end on all of his reverbs above 4K with a substantial dip around 1 or 2K. And of course, he's getting rid of most of the stuff below 100 hertz. And I just wanted to show this image to people who are on the video version of this podcast so you can see that you are in fact allowed to do this much EQing or more to your reverb returns. Because this is one of the biggest things that I'm always telling some of my newer mixing clients is that they aren't processing the reverb returns enough. They have stock sounding reverbs. And the thing about stock sounding reverbs is all of the reverb presets are made to impress you so that you buy the reverb or you buy the plugin. That is the goal of most of the major presets in most of the major reverbs, is for you to listen to a sound in solo through that reverb and go, wow, it sounds so big. It sounds so pretty. It sounds so glossy. It sounds so large. It sounds so long. That's awesome. And when you're flipping through presets and trying to choose a reverb, maybe by listening to on a solo vocal, you go, that reverb sounds great. And then you put it in the mix, and the reverb takes up way too much space in the mix. It makes itself way too known. It's way too apparent. It's way too cloying. And Prizzie was saying that he doesn't always EQ this much. He's not always literally rolling off everything above 4K on the reverb with a really steep filter. He did it on this, and the reverb on this doesn't sound lo-fi. It just sounds warm and full and beautiful. And a little retro, a little old school, a little dreamy. But if you listen to this record, you wouldn't imagine that it has basically a telephone effect filter on the reverb. But that's the thing about beautiful reverbs that are big, that really make an impression in a mix. They're almost always heavily EQ'd like this. And the more big reverb you hear and the more prominent reverb you hear in a mix, the more likely it has an EQ like this. And those reverbs that you can get away with EQing much less are often reverbs that are much lower in the mix. So the more that you want your reverb to be a big part of the sound of the mix, or your delay to be a major feature in the mix, the more that you're going to want to do these radical kinds of EQ. The more that your mix is about the atmosphere, the more that you want to do this substantial reshaping. And I want you to look at this picture with your eyes and emblazon it into your brain. You can do this kind of EQ filtering on your reverbs. Try it. Try cutting out everything above 3K, 4K, 5K on your reverbs on the next mix you do, especially if you want to have a lot of reverb in that mix. And then if that's too much and the reverbs are too dark, then bring some back in. Make the slope a little more shallow. Start at a higher frequency. But I want you to err on the side of seeing how much high frequency you can take out of your reverb and have it sound great. And then if that's too much, bring some back in. Because what so many of you guys are doing, especially in the beginner and intermediate end of things, is you're doing the exact opposite of that. You're saying, oh, I've heard you're supposed to EQ your reverbs. Maybe I should start doing that. And you start taking down just a little bit of high frequency on your reverb. And you say, I hope that's enough. Maybe if it turns out not to be enough, I'll do a little more. No. Do the opposite. Take it all out. Murder all the high end in your reverb. Eviscerate it. Gone. And then if you really miss it, bring some back bit by bit by bit until the reverb has the degree of clarity and brightness that you think it should have. So overshoot. Always overshoot when you're doing your treatments and then roll it back to where it should be. That is one of the biggest principles I can say around mixing in general, is you're always going to want to hone in to final choices on things like EQs, fader levels, everything. Overshoot where you think you should wind up, then back off till you're undershooting it, and then find the right spot. You're never going to get all the way there the first time. It's just like tuning a guitar. You're never going to tune it exactly to the right pitch. You're going to overshoot it, you're going to undershoot it, and you're going to come back to the center. And you should be doing the same thing every time you EQ things and every time you move a fader, more or less. All right, the last one I want to talk about, and there's a great insight in here. I'm going to try to make it quick because I think this is important. Dana Nielsen. My biggest takeaways from Dana. First of all, personality-wise, the guy's like a Labrador. And what I mean by that is he loves to be working on the record that he's working on. And he approaches things from the positive of, what do I like in this record? Because so many of us, when we come to a record, we first think of all the things that are wrong and that we want to fix and that are bad. All the things that we can improve, all the things they didn't do good enough and that we're going to impress them by doing better. And he comes to it the opposite way. He comes to it with, what do I love about this already? What already works about this track? What here is already good? What can I fall in love with here? And how can I bring that to the fore? And that is such a healthier perspective to have when mixing, even if you're working with less than stellar material. You know, if you're going to be a good friend or like a likable person and you go to your friend's concert, you should probably say to them all the good things about the concert first. Hey, I really liked your, even if like they bungled like half the songs and like the band was totally out of time, and you could find something. Hey, I really liked your guitar tone on that one song. You know, that's what you would do with your friends, right? You would find something nice to say and you would lead with that if you want to be likable and not a jerk. Do that to the mixes you work on. Treat the mixes you work on, the tracks that you're working on, like they're a good friend whose show you've just seen, and you want to lead with all the things that they're doing right. Hey, I really like this, that, and the other thing. And then if you have something negative or critical to say, you've couched it in that, and then remind them of something else that was good. I mean, that's what I do with my coaching clients. I had a coaching call earlier today with a mixer who was doing a good job, and I told him about all the things he did right. I led with that. And then we spent most of the call on things that I thought he could improve and do better. And we probably spent, an hour-long call, we probably spent 40 or 50 minutes talking about the things I thought could be even better. But then at the end, I want to remind him, like, I'm not here saying this stuff to suck your confidence. We're focusing on the stuff that could be improved because that's where you're going to have the greatest results. But I also want to remind you of what you're doing right so that you're excited to do this again. So you go back and do it some more because that's how you're going to get better, is by doing this again and again and again. That's how you deal with people. That's how you deal with your friends. That's how you should deal with your clients. And it's how you should deal with the song that you're working on right now. Treat the song like it's a friend of yours. When you're talking to the song, don't yell at it and remind it of everything that's wrong about it and how it's not good enough for you. That's not how you would treat your wife or your girlfriend or your husband or your friend or some stranger you just met online at the supermarket. But you're going to treat a song that way? That someone is commissioning you and paying you money to work on? Nah. Now, when you're at Dana's level, it becomes easier because he's working on some absolutely great sounding tracks. This track from Mount Joy was honestly one of my favorite tracks from MixCon this year. I loved so many of them. Actually, Prizzy's R&B track was really good. A lot of people complimented that. I really like this Mount Joy track that he brought in. I thought the low roar productions that Andrew was doing was absolutely gorgeous. Everyone brought in cool tracks, but the whole point here is that Dana had a great sounding track, and even if it wasn't great, he would have found what was great in it. But he had a great sounding track and he said, what here works? And he absolutely loved what they had with the kick drum. And he's like, I don't want to mess that up. And that's one of the most essential core things that's going on. But then the second big thing I want to tell you about here that I thought was so important, such a core takeaway. is that Dana is about building up the mix around its essential elements. And this was something that he had in common with Nico Bolas, and something I recommend in the Mixing Breakthroughs course, and I give you some exercises to do that will really help you with this, is that even though Dana is the kind of guy where he's getting the original mix with all the plugins on it, and he's trying usually to do just an enhancement of the mix that's there and kind of respect the mix that you have and add to it, even though that's his approach, he still mutes everything and also brings in the core elements section by section. He says, I want to get a really minimalist mix. I want to figure out in this song what are really the most important things. And for this particular song, he said, it's the acoustic guitar and the vocal, or the essential elements. Can I make a mix that really works, that's just the acoustic guitar and vocal? Because that is the whole hook of the song. And if you stripped everything else away and just the acoustic guitar and the vocal were there and they worked together, people would listen to that. So let me make sure that those two things really work together. And then let me think, what is the next most important element after that? And then bring it in. And then he has this core. He has a minimalist mix with 2 or 3 elements that really works and is listenable. And he said, if we muted everything else and we just had these 2 or 3 elements, this is good. This is fun to listen to. And then he brings in everything else and makes sure they're in the right spot. And I love that because that's the exact same thing that Nico said, the guy who tears everything down, has none of your plugins on it and just, starts from scratch. And Dana, who was the complete other end of the spectrum, he says, give me your session with all your plugins on it and I'll just tweak from there. Both of them harped on that same thing. And it was one of the core messages in Mixing Breakthroughs of finding out what's truly important in any given section. Starting your mix from there, and in every single section, just always reminding yourself and always asking yourself what should be the most prominent elements in this section and what currently are the most prominent elements in this section. And if you can ask that question to yourself again and again, what should be the most prominent here? What are the things I want to hear and feel the most? And what am I hearing and feeling the most? And you ask yourself those 2 questions, you will make great mixing choices again and again and again. All right, I think that's long enough for today. We've gone about 40 minutes here, which is longer than I intended to go. I want to wrap this up by reminding you that we are giving away more than $10,000 worth of free gear in the MixCon Mega Giveaway. Go to mix-con.com. That's mix-con.com. And sign up for the MixCon Mega Giveaway there. More than $10,000 worth of free gear with 3 chances to win. The sign up for this thing is ending soon, so please get on it. Also, check out all the MixCon masterclasses. You've got to see these. All of them are pure gold. And I also have hour-long interviews with all these guys. I also want to give a shout out to Pro Tools. They are sponsoring the podcast this month. And right now you can get up to 40% off of Pro Tools. Go to avid.com/pro-tools/SonicScoop. That's avid.com/pro-tools/SonicScoop for 40% off Pro Tools subscriptions. That is like getting 4 months for free in your first year. It is the DAW I use, and that is used by almost all the MixCon Masterclass guys because it is still the most prominent DAW probably in the world, but and especially doubly so in the US when it comes to pro music production. And it's getting better every single year. And I'm going to be doing a live stream about the new updates to Pro Tools very soon, coming up later this month. So check that out if you want to deep dive into all the new things that have happened in Pro Tools in the last year, because there's so many cool new features in here. Shout out and thanks also to Jay-Z microphones. Right now, you can get a whole bunch of their microphones, including the one I'm talking to right now. This is a Jay-Z Amethyst. I love the way it looks. I love the way it sounds. And right now, it's 50% off for their Black Friday sale. But you can stack a discount on top of that. Get another 10% off with the code Justin at checkout. JUSTIN, put that at checkout, and you're getting, I guess, like 60% off. So fantastic. Also, big shout out and thanks to Soundtoys, making some of my favorite creative mixing effects in the known universe. Try out anything they make for free for 30 days at soundtoys.com. And right now, there's 60% off of upgrades as part of their Black Friday sale. So if you have an older version of Soundtoys and you want to upgrade to the full bundle, that's the big thing that's going on right now. Make sure you get the latest version of it. And if you bought any individual Soundtoys plugin in 2015 or later, you may be eligible for a discounted upgrade to version 5. So if you've bought 1 or 2 Soundtoys plugins in the past decade and you want a cheaper upgrade path to the full bundle, it is one of the biggest deals in music production. I absolutely love it. and you see their plugins come up again and again and again on the MixCon master classes. Big shout and thanks to those guys. Big shout and thanks to you for hanging out with me for this week's episode of the SonicScoop podcast. This has been Justin Colletti of SonicScoop. See you next time.